Before we drift into tonight's story, I hope your day has treated you kindly, no matter where in the world you find yourself. Is it already night where you are? Are you settling into bed or just taking a quiet pause while the world hums on around you? Whether you are in a dim apartment high above New York, a sun-drenched room in Rome, a wind-swept coast in Ireland, or anywhere else beneath this restless sky, just know, for the next little while, you're not alone. Here at DrowsyTeller, we invite you into tales that blur the line between dreams and reality. If you're someone who finds comfort in the strange or wonder in the unexplained, then you've come to the right corner of the night. So close your eyes, or leave them open just a little longer. Let's slip into a story where the world doesn't always follow the rules, and neither do we. The simulation hypothesis. Elias Rowe had always believed that the universe whispered its truths to those willing to wait and listen. What he didn't expect was for it to one day start screaming. The first anomaly surfaced on a Tuesday morning in March of 2024. Exactly 12 years after the world was prophesied to end. Elias sat hunched in his cramped home lab, surrounded by aging equipment salvaged from his days at CERN. The digital clock on his desk read 11:11 a.m. His phone showed the same time. So did his laptop. And his microwave. Not strange, he told himself. Devices sync these days. It's normal. But then, the analog wall clock, the one his wife Sarah had gifted him before she passed in 2012, the one that had run 3 minutes behind for over a decade, clicked forward. 3 sudden ticks. 11:11 precisely. Elias froze, coffee cooling in his hands. In 3 decades of theoretical physics, he had learned the difference between coincidence and impossibility. And this, he knew, was the latter. He spent the next hour documenting everything. Timestamps, photos, video. The scientific method had been his anchor since Sarah's death, the last solid thing in a world that had felt increasingly unreal. But as he recorded the data, the anomalies kept piling up. His particle detection instruments, designed to log random quantum fluctuations, began registering patterns. Not the usual chaotic dance of particles, but something structured, repetitive. At precisely 1:11 p.m., every detector spiked, again at 2:22. Elias searched his archives from the past 6 months. The patterns had been there all along, hidden in the noise. Quantum events that should have been random were clustering around repeating timestamps. 11:11, 1:11, 2:22, 3:33. The odds of this kind of synchronization happening by chance were roughly 1 in 10 billion. That evening, Elias sat in his dimly lit office, staring at rows of numbers that shouldn't exist. Outside, the suburban street was quiet. Normal, but normal itself was now a suspect. He began searching online. And what he found chilled him. Forums were filled with similar accounts. Clocks aligning, repeating numbers on digital screens. But it didn't stop there. People described what they called glitches in the matrix, reality itself stuttering, repeating, or freezing. A woman in Ohio swore she saw the same bird fly past her window 3 times in an identical path. A man in Germany described watching the same car crash occur twice in succession, with the same vehicles and the same outcome. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of people reported experiences with missing time, moments that slipped away too fast or stretched painfully long. They called it the Mandela effect, shared false memories of events that supposedly never happened. But these weren't hazy recollections. They were vivid, specific, and astonishingly widespread. Some remembered Nelson Mandela dying in prison during the 1980s, not in 2013. Others swore the Berenstain Bears were spelled with an E, not an A. Maps were different. Movie quotes had changed. Elias wanted to dismiss it all as mass delusion amplified by the internet. But the data was real. The synchronicities were measurable. And every strange occurrence seemed to center around one pivotal date. December 21st, 2012, the day the world was supposed to end. He had been at CERN that day, working on what became his final major project before grief drove him into seclusion. He remembered the headlines about the Mayan calendar, the doomsday fears, the collective exhale on December 22nd. But what if the world hadn't continued? The thought hit him like a physical blow. He tried to dismiss it as a grief-fueled fantasy, but it stayed with him. What if reality had ended? What if everything since then had been different? He dove into old data archives. Official records showed nothing unusual. Solar activity normal. No cosmic disturbances. But Elias had access to sources others didn't. He reached out to former colleagues at CERN, NASA contacts from his postdoc days, researchers who owed him favors. And buried in forgotten servers and old backups, he found something. On December 21st, 2012, at 11:11 a.m. GMT, every satellite monitoring the cosmic microwave background detected an enormous energy spike. It lasted 2.3 seconds. It was dismissed as a glitch. The data removed from official reports. But Elias found fragments, scraps left in caches, backups, personal drives. The signal had a shape, a structure. It wasn't random, it was intentional. And in the 12 years since, smaller but similar signals had been appearing more and more frequently. The universe was no longer behaving randomly. It was behaving like a system under pressure. As March turned into April, Elias observed new anomalies. His experiments on entropy, measuring decay in isolated systems, showed impossibilities. Closed systems spontaneously organized themselves. Heat flowed from colder to hotter objects. The second law of thermodynamics was breaking, but only during those synchronized times. Elias began to form a hypothesis, one so radical he could barely let himself think it. What if reality had changed? What if we were no longer in the original universe? What if, after some unknown catastrophe, human consciousness had been transferred into a simulation, a digital environment designed to preserve our species? The Mandela effect? Compression errors in memory. Synchronicities? System glitches? Violations of physical laws? Computational shortcuts? Missing time? Delays in processing? If this was true, one terrifying question remained. What happened to the real world? And what happens when this one fails? Elias looked at the data, the patterns, the impossibilities. For the first time since Sarah's death, he didn't feel despair. He felt purpose. He would prove the world had ended, and he would find a way out. At 3:33 a.m. on a Thursday, an email arrived. That should have been the first warning. Dr. Rowe, it read, I believe you're looking for the same answers. I am. The cracks are getting wider. We need to talk. Attached was a single file, a spectrographic analysis of what appeared to be empty space. But the mathematical annotations made Elias's breath catch. Someone had been measuring the same quantum fluctuations he had been tracking, but with instrumentation far more advanced than his salvaged equipment from CERN. The data revealed something Elias's tools had been too primitive to detect. The fluctuations weren't random or localized. They were global, synchronized, and decaying in a pattern that strongly suggested the systematic failure of some deeper infrastructure. Elias spent the morning trying to trace the origin of the email, but it had been routed through so many proxy servers that it may as well have come from a different reality. Eventually, he gave up and sent a simple response. "I'm listening." The reply came just minutes later. "Riverside Park, North Bench, by the Old Oak. Today, 11:11 a.m., come alone." Against every instinct forged through decades of academic skepticism and cautious paranoia, Elias went. The woman waiting on the bench looked to be in her early 30s. Her complexion was pale, computer glow pale, and her baseball cap was pulled low over her eyes. Her hands stayed tucked in her jacket pockets. "Dr. Rowe," she said as he approached, "I'm Mira Chen. I used to work in government data recovery until I started noticing things that weren't supposed to be there." Elias sat beside her, hyper-aware of how exposed they were in the open park. "You sent me the spectrographic data. I sent you one fragment of a very large puzzle," Mira replied. "How familiar are you with procedural generation in computer graphics?" Elias nodded. "And algorithms that build complex environments from simple rules." "Exactly. It's how video games render vast worlds without storing every detail. The system generates only what you see, when you see it, and discards what's not in view." She pulled out a tablet and brought up a layered diagram. "I've been analyzing data patterns since 2012, not internet data, quantum field fluctuations, the noise of reality itself." The visual looked like a dynamic three-dimensional map of data flow, overlaid with quantum mechanical formulae. Elias recognized some of the equations from his own unfinished work on consciousness transference theory. "This doesn't make sense," he said. "Quantum fields don't behave like network systems." "They do," Mira said quietly, "if they're being simulated." She pointed to a section of the diagram. "Look at these compression patterns. The system's constantly optimizing itself, erasing unobserved data, generating new data only when needed. It's procedural generation at a scale we've never imagined. And it's failing." She swiped to another file. "These are glitches, errors in the quantum foam, breakdowns in the physical constants, places where the algorithms are stuttering, repeating." It was like seeing the source code of reality and finding typos. "I've been tracking these anomalies for 2 years," Mira continued. "They're accelerating. The system is losing processing power, storage space, or both. And when it finally fails," Elias murmured, "everything ends." "That's assuming this is all real," he added, "that we're actually inside a simulation." Mira looked at him, her eyes heavy with the weight of too many sleepless nights. "Dr. Rowe, I've spent my entire career recovering corrupted data. I know what failure looks like. I know what a dying system looks like. And this is it." She pulled up another image. "This is a global map of Mandela effect reports, cross-referenced with quantum fluctuation anomalies. The match is exact. Every time someone remembers something wrong, there's a glitch in the surrounding quantum field. The system is trying to preserve consistency, but it's starting to fail." Elias stared at the overlay. "You're saying the Mandela effect isn't just memory distortion. It's the simulation breaking down." "I'm saying our memories of the original universe are leaking through," Mira said. "The system copied our consciousness to create this simulation, but the copy wasn't perfect. Sometimes we remember what came before." "The reset," Elias whispered. "December 21st, 2012. Mira nodded. "That's when the original universe ended, and this one began." Her voice softened to nearly a whisper. "I found fragments, digital fossils, traces of the world that came before. I think something catastrophic happened to the real Earth." So catastrophic, the only way to preserve humanity was to transfer our consciousness into a simulated environment. Elias felt the park tilt around him. Who built it? I don't know, Mira said. Whoever did, they had technology far beyond anything we've imagined. To simulate a universe at this resolution, the computing power would be astronomical. They sat in silence, watching the world move in ordinary rhythms. Joggers on the path, children swinging, birds flying. A perfectly normal day, in a reality that might not be real at all. There's something else, Mira finally said. I've been tracking the decay curve. If it continues, we've got maybe 6 months before systemic failure begins. Cascade failure, Elias said. One part crashes, then the rest follows. The whole system collapses. And if we're right, everyone and everything inside it goes with it. Elias thought of Sarah, her death in 2012, the grief, the isolation. If this was all a simulation, she had died in the original world, and now even her digital echo was fading. Is there a way out? He asked. I think so, Mira said. The system must have boundaries, places where the simulation ends and the infrastructure begins. If we can find one and breach it, we might escape. If there's still an outside left, she stood. I've been working alone for 2 years, but I need help, someone who understands the physics, someone who can turn theory into action. Elias looked around at the people in the park. How many of them were questioning reality? How many simply accepted it? What do you need from me? Help me find the exit point, Mira said. Help me break out of this prison. Help me prove we're more than just code. As they walked away together, Elias felt something he hadn't felt in 12 years. Hope. Not the hope of reclaiming a lost world, but the hope of finding truth in a world built on illusion. Reality was unraveling, but maybe, just maybe, they could find the thread that led to something real. The exit point. The abandoned warehouse in Queens looked like every other forgotten industrial relic in the area. That was exactly why Mira had chosen it. Hidden behind rusting shipping containers and overgrown lots, it was the kind of place municipal records had long since stopped tracking. Inside, Elias stopped in awe. Jesus Christ, he breathed. The warehouse floor was packed with quantum field generators, their coils humming with barely contained energy. Each machine was finely tuned and interconnected by a tangle of cables. At the center of the array sat a chair, something between a dentist's recliner and an execution device, surrounded by sensors for brain activity and quantum fluctuations. I call it the resonance chamber, Mira said, watching him take it in. It's designed to detect and amplify quantum consciousness, the part of us that exists at the intersection of matter and information. Elias moved around the equipment, recognizing repurposed components from across scientific disciplines. How long did this take? 3 years. I started with basic quantum manipulation, but the system is too stable. Every time I tried to disrupt it, it corrected the change immediately. She gestured to a wall of monitors displaying live streams of constantly shifting data. Then I realized the simulation isn't just preserving physical law, it's preserving us, consciousness. When someone dies, the system releases their processing resources. When someone is born, it allocates more. You're saying consciousness is just software? In this reality, it is. Our minds are running on distributed quantum processes. The question is, what happens if we isolate one and overload it? Elias stepped closer to the chamber. We find out what's on the other side. Elias studied the streaming data, immediately recognizing patterns that mirrored his own research. You're trying to trigger a buffer overflow in the quantum consciousness protocol. Exactly, Mira said. If we can generate enough quantum noise around a single consciousness, we might be able to force it beyond the simulation's boundaries, like an emergency ejection from a cosmic operating system. She brought up another set of displays, global quantum field measurements, and pointed to the anomalies. I've been tracking the simulation's weak points, places where it struggles to maintain consistency. Most of them are in remote, low-population areas where computational load is lighter. She zoomed in on a map of Siberia and highlighted a location roughly 200 kilometers northeast of Novosibirsk. There's something odd about this place. The quantum readings are completely off. It's like the system is barely holding that region together. What's supposed to be there? Elias asked. Officially, nothing. But I went through declassified files and old satellite imagery. There's a facility out there, built sometime in late 2012 or early 2013, funded by a black-budget defense project, but every single document is heavily redacted. A chill ran down Elias's spine. They built something right after the reset. I think it's an access point, Mira said. Either a way to monitor the simulation or a failsafe in case something went wrong. She pulled up high-resolution satellite photos of the complex. The buildings were arranged in an eerily precise geometric formation. "Look at this," she said. "It's not random architecture. It's sacred geometry, the same mathematical patterns found in ancient sites all over the world." Elias's breath caught. He knew these formations. Resonance geometries. Shapes that amplify quantum field effects. Someone built a quantum amplification array, he said slowly, right on top of a region where the simulation is weakest. "If we can get there," Mira continued, "and use their facility with the resonance chamber, we might be able to tear open a hole in the simulation. In theory," Elias said. "But what's the catch?" Mira's expression darkened. "The power requirements are astronomical. Even if we could transport the chamber to Siberia, we'd need to generate a quantum field strong enough to destabilize the simulation locally. The energy release would be equivalent to a small nuclear blast." Elias walked over to the chair at the center of the chamber. "What if we don't try to escape physically?" "What do you mean?" "What if we just send consciousness? The simulation copied our minds into this environment. Maybe we can reverse it, send them back, or, at least, outside." "That's dangerously speculative," Mira warned. "We don't know what's out there. We don't even know if consciousness can exist in whatever's beyond this system." "But we do know what's here," Elias said softly. "A failing simulation. One that has 6 months left, at best. At least, this gives us a chance." Over the next 2 months, they reworked the resonance chamber for a new purpose: consciousness transfer. Elias integrated his decades of research on quantum cognition, while Mira engineered the software and hardware needed to implement the protocols. They ran test after test, slowly raising the energy levels, refining their configurations. Their first breakthrough came in June, during what was meant to be a simple simulation response test. Instead, they created something neither expected, a temporal loop. For precisely 2.3 seconds, time froze. The second hand on Elias's watch ticked to 11:17, then 11:19, then snapped back to 11:17. Again. "We broke it," Mira whispered wide-eyed. "We actually broke the simulation." The data confirmed it. The simulation had suffered a localized failure in temporal processing. For those 2.3 seconds, it couldn't maintain time. "This is it," Elias said, scanning the readings. "We don't need the Siberian facility. We just need to generate a strong enough temporal disturbance. That's the exit." But even as they celebrated, Elias noticed something disturbing. Buried within the quantum field data was a pattern he recognized, identical to one he had found in the cosmic microwave background radiation from December 21st, 2012. That night, alone, Elias returned to the raw data from the original cosmic anomaly. Hidden deep within the quantum noise, overlooked, erased, scrubbed from official records, wasn't just an energy spike. It was a message. He spent 3 sleepless days decoding it, using techniques that wouldn't be invented for another 5 decades. When he finally decrypted the message, it was heartbreakingly simple. Sarah sends her love. The original universe is gone. This simulation is all that remains. Do not try to leave. E, the signature, his own initial, but written in a style of handwriting that didn't feel like his. It was as if another version of him had sent a message across the boundary from a dying timeline. He stared at the words until his eyes blurred with tears. If the message was real, then Sarah was still alive, somewhere. And if the message was real, then leaving was not only possible, it was necessary. He reached for his phone to call Mira, then stopped. The message had warned him not to try, but it had also proven that communication, and possibly escape, was possible. Which version of himself should he believe? That night he dreamed. He stood in his old CERN office. The particle accelerator was gone. In its place was Sarah. She wore the blue dress from their first date. Her eyes sparkled just as they had in 2012. Before the cancer, before everything fell apart. "You can't save me, Elias," she said gently. "I'm already gone, but you can save yourself." "But the message," he began. "It came from a version of you who was afraid," she said, "who thought preservation mattered more than truth. But you're not him anymore, are you?" He awoke with tears on his face and a single conviction burning in his chest. He was going to activate the chamber. When he found Mira the next morning, she was hunched over the monitors, her expression grim. "The simulation's falling apart faster than we predicted," she said. "Cascade failure is accelerating. We may have 2 weeks, max." "Then we move now," Elias said. Mira hesitated. "I've been thinking about this. What if we're wrong? What if there's nothing on the other side?" Elias told her everything. The message, the signal, Sarah's name. "And if there's nothing," he said, "then we find out together." She looked at him for a long, quiet moment, then nodded. "Okay, but we do this carefully, safely, as much as we can." The next week was a blur of preparation. Mira calibrated the chamber to maximum output. Elias perfected the consciousness transfer protocol. They ran dozens of simulations, every one confirming the theoretical possibility. But it remained just that, theory. The night before the final experiment, they shared a bottle of wine, watching the monitors blink and ripple. "Do you think we're heroes or villains?" Mira asked. "I think we're explorers," Elias replied. "And sometimes exploration means leaving safety behind." Come. The next morning, as they began final preparations, the alarms began to sound. Quantum field readings surged. Stability indices dropped toward critical thresholds. "It's happening," Mira said, pale. "The cascade failure. It's starting." Outside, reality faltered. Streetlights blinked in impossible patterns. Cars repeated turns in endless loops. A flock of birds hung motionless, frozen mid-flight. "We're out of time," Elias said. "Now or never." He climbed into the resonance chair. Mira began attaching the quantum field sensors to his temples. The chamber began to hum, the frequency rising until it felt like the universe itself was singing. "Elias?" Mira said softly, her hand poised above the activation switch. What if this kills you? Then I'll die knowing the truth, he replied. That's more than most people ever get. But as the power levels surged toward the activation threshold, Mira stepped away from the controls. I can't do it, she said quietly. I can't risk destroying the only world we have left. Mira, Elias said gently, what if you're wrong? What if there is something out there? What if this simulation is the only thing preventing billions of consciousnesses from fading into oblivion? He looked at her, not with anger, but with understanding and sadness. Then you'll have to live with that choice. But I can't live without knowing. And with that, Elias reached over and activated the resonance chamber himself. The world around him detonated into light, sound, and sensation beyond anything a human mind was built to process. Elias felt himself stretching, dissolving, his consciousness merging with the quantum substrate of existence itself. He was everywhere and nowhere. He was everything and nothing. A solitary spark floating in an endless sea of probability. And then, darkness. Elias awoke to the sound of breathing, not his own. He was lying on a cold metal surface, surrounded by softly humming equipment. Restraints held his arms and legs, not tight, but secure. Comfortable, not confining. Above him stretched a dark metal ceiling that faded into shadow. Subject Rho has achieved consciousness, said a voice from somewhere beyond his field of view. Simulation breach successful. Memory integration appears stable. Elias tried to speak, but his throat was dry, unused. How long had he been unconscious? He managed to turn his head slightly and saw a transparent wall, like thick glass or advanced polymer. Beyond it, shadowy figures moved. One of them stepped forward. Elias caught his breath. It was human, but altered. The figure's face was recognizably human, but the eyes were larger, more luminous, glowing softly with an internal light. Neural filaments sprouted from its temples like silver ivy, and its skin shimmered with a translucent quality that hinted at advanced genetic engineering. "Hello, Doctor," the figure said. Its voice held harmonics that danced between human warmth and machine precision. "Welcome to the outside." "Who are you?" Elias whispered. "I was once known as David Chen," the figure replied. "I'm what you might call a caretaker now. You've been working with my descendant, Mira." Elias's mind reeled. Descendant? The simulation runs at an accelerated rate compared to our reality, David explained. What you experienced as 12 years was closer to 300 years in real time. Humanity has had time to evolve. Technologically, biologically, philosophically. David gestured off-screen. "Please look to your left." Elias turned his head and gasped. Through a vast, transparent wall he saw space, true space. Not a night sky, but a vacuum painted with stars so vivid, so piercingly bright, it took his breath away. And hanging there, impossibly real, was Earth. "The original," David said, "still intact, still beautiful." "The simulation," Elias began. "I thought it was created because the world ended." David shook his head gently. "It was created because the world was about to end. In late 2012, we detected an inbound gamma-ray burst. It would have sterilized the planet. We had no time to shield Earth. So, we created the simulation as an ark, to preserve human consciousness while we developed the means to survive." "But the warning," Elias said. "The message. It told me not to leave." David nodded. "Sent by an earlier version of yourself, one who feared the truth. You've been trying to escape the simulation for decades, Dr. Rho. This was your 17th attempt." Elias's stomach dropped. 17th. Each time you rediscover the truth. Each time you construct a path to breach the barrier. And each time we offer you the same choice. Return to the simulation with full memory, or remain here and help us bring humanity home. David stepped closer to the glass. The gamma ray burst past 3 years ago. Earth is safe again. We've been preparing to restore humanity, every consciousness inside the simulation, back to physical form. But the others? Other versions of me? They chose to return, to forget. They couldn't accept the responsibility of guiding billions back to reality. But you, this version of you, you've changed. Loss has tempered you. Truth has reshaped you. Elias turned back toward the earth, toward home. The simulation? Every consciousness will be given the choice. Return to a physical body or remain in the simulated realm. This time, it will be a true choice, not one constrained by a collapsing system. David placed a hand against the glass. Your wife, Dr. Rowe, she's been waiting for you. She's safe, she's real, and she's ready for you to come home. Elias closed his eyes as tears spilled down his cheeks. Sarah was alive. Earth was real, and for the first time, he had a choice. Not between comfort and illusion, but between illusion and truth. What do I need to do? He asked. Help us wake them, David said. Help us bring humanity home. On the monitors surrounding Elias's chamber, data stream shifted, no longer showing system failure but system preparation. The simulation was not collapsing. It was transitioning. Simulation. Status, preparing for full consciousness. Transfer. Estimated time to completion. 72 hours. Welcome home, Doctor. Rowe, welcome to the real world. Outside the observation window, Earth rotated slowly through the black, glittering vastness. Elias finally understood the truth of the exit point. It wasn't about escaping reality. It was about returning to it. And for the first time in 12 years, or 300, or however long it had truly been, he was ready. The simulation had been humanity's cocoon. Now it was time to emerge as something new, something real. The greatest adventure was only beginning. Operation High Jump. The Frozen Secret. What you're about to read comes from a classified journal, discovered in 1996, 3 years after its author's unexplained death. The journal belonged to Lieutenant Commander Mason Hale, an intelligence officer with the United States Navy. What follows is his first-hand account of Operation High Jump, and the truth buried deep beneath the Antarctic ice. U.S. Navy Intelligence Division. Classification: Eyes Only. Ordered destroyed. Date range: August 1946, March 1947. Entry 1, August 15, 1946, USS Pine Island, Norfolk. Naval Base, my name is Lieutenant Commander Mason Hale. If you're reading this, I'm likely dead, and someone has found what I was never supposed to document. I'm writing this because the truth has a way of resurfacing, even when buried beneath miles of ice and decades of silence. 3 days ago, I received orders that changed everything I thought I understood about our world. I was to report immediately to Admiral Richard Byrd for a classified briefing on Operation High Jump. Publicly, it was described as the largest Antarctic expedition in history. 13 ships, 4,700 personnel, aircraft carriers, and enough armaments to invade a sovereign nation. For a research mission, it was suspiciously overarmed. The briefing room was cold and austere. The men seated around me wore no insignia, but their posture and silence spoke volumes. They were intelligence. Admiral Byrd stood at the head of the table, aged and steeled by knowledge few could imagine. He laid out a series of aerial photographs, black and white images marked by impossible shapes. "Gentlemen," Byrd began, "what I'm about to tell you does not leave this room. Officially, Operation High Jump is a cold-weather training and logistics mission. Unofficially," he paused, letting his gaze settle on each of us, "we're going to Antarctica to determine whether we are alone." The photos showed endless stretches of white, but within them, anomalies, shadows that weren't shadows, geometric structures embedded in ice, metallic reflections where none should exist. "This one," Byrd said, pointing, "was taken during a reconnaissance flight in late 1945. The Brazilian Navy captured similar sightings in their territorial waters, disc-shaped objects, moving at velocities and angles that defied aerodynamics, emerging from and vanishing into the ice." A colonel I didn't know leaned forward. "Sir, are we talking about the Germans?" Byrd's expression hardened. "That's what we need to determine. In 1939, Nazi Germany launched an expedition to Queen Maud Land. They renamed it Neuschwabenland and dropped thousands of metal markers emblazoned with swastikas to claim it. That mission lasted far longer than necessary for mapping." He slid another photo into view. It showed a vast glacier wall, with a rectangular doorway carved into its face. Smooth, perfect. "Taken 6 months ago," Byrd said. "Nature doesn't carve perfect rectangles." The temperature in the room seemed to drop, and this time it had nothing to do with air conditioning. He locked eyes with me, and in that moment I saw something I had never seen in a superior officer before. Uncertainty mingled with fear. We weren't going to Antarctica to explore, Commander Hale. We were going to see who, or what, was already there. Tree 2, September 3rd, 1946. South Atlantic at sea. The voyage south has been largely uneventful, but tension is thick aboard the ship. Word travels fast on a vessel, and despite the high classification level, rumors spread like wildfire. The men know this isn't just another research mission. You don't send destroyers and aircraft carriers to study penguin migration patterns. I've been assigned to the intelligence division aboard the Pine Island, reporting directly to Admiral Byrd. My responsibilities include analyzing findings, compiling secure reports, and maintaining direct communication with Washington. What they failed to mention is that I would also be recording what may become the most significant discovery in human history, or the most dangerous cover-up ever undertaken. Last night, I spoke with Admiral Byrd privately on deck. The Southern Cross was brilliant overhead, and the sea lay calm and black around us. He seemed different out there, less military, more human. "Commander," he said, lighting his pipe, shielding the flame from the breeze. "I've been to both poles. I've seen things that never made it into the official logs. Strange lights in the sky. Radio signals from places marked as empty ice. Magnetic anomalies our equipment couldn't explain." He took a long drag and exhaled slowly. "But this is different. This time, we have evidence." "Evidence of what, sir?" I asked. He was silent for a long moment, staring into the dark sea. 20 years ago, I would have said Germans. Hidden bases. Advanced tech developed during the war, but the war's been over for a year, and the activity has only increased, not decreased. Whatever's down there, it's not abandoned Nazi facilities. "Then what is it?" I asked. "I don't know, Commander," he said finally, "but I have a feeling we're about to find out." He turned to face me fully. His eyes, caught in the moonlight, looked haunted. "Keep a detailed record of everything we see, everything we encounter. Promise me that." I did, not realizing how heavy that promise would become. Entry 3, October 12, 1946. Little America, 4 Base, Ross Ice Shelf. We've completed construction of our primary base using Bird's previous expedition site as a foundation. The scale of the operation is staggering. We have enough supplies and personnel to last 8 months, yet the mission is scheduled for only 4. The timeline doesn't match the resources. Strange things began almost immediately. 2 days after establishing camp, our radio operators picked up encrypted transmissions on frequencies that shouldn't exist. Technologically advanced, highly sophisticated, and clearly not from us, the signals were traced to grid coordinates deep within Queen Maud land, the very region the Germans once claimed as Neuschwabenland. Lieutenant Peterson, our chief radio tech, brought me the transcripts. He looked pale and visibly shaken. "Sir, I've worked in communications for 15 years. I've never seen encryption like this. It's not just coded, it's built differently, and part of it, it's in German, but not standard German. It's filled with terminology I've never heard." I listened. Most of it was incomprehensible. But one word stood out, repeating across different samples. Base 211. According to wartime intel, there had been rumors about a secret Nazi installation in Antarctica, codenamed Base 211. At the time, it was dismissed as fantasy. Apparently, it wasn't. Admiral Byrd ordered immediate aerial reconnaissance over Queen Maud land. What came back changed everything. Entry 4, October 18th, 1946 Emergency Intelligence Briefing. At 0800 hours, Lieutenant Commander Johnson returned from a photographic reconnaissance flight with a report that sent shockwaves through the command structure. I'm documenting this while the details remain sharp, though I suspect this record will never become public. Johnson's voice was steady during debrief, but disbelief danced in his eyes. At approximately 0630, while flying at 15,000 feet, we observed multiple metallic objects emerging from the ice sheet. The location was roughly 200 meters inland from the coast. Admiral Byrd leaned forward. "Describe the objects, Commander." "Disc-shaped, sir. Each about 50 to 75 feet in diameter, judging by terrain features. No visible propulsion systems. No exhaust. They accelerated from 0 to what I estimate as over 1,000 miles per hour in just a few seconds." Silence overtook the room. "They didn't come from surface structures," Johnson continued. "They emerged from beneath the ice sheet." He paused. "We counted 7 of them. They disappeared into the clouds." Byrd examined the photographs. Even in black and white, the crafts were clearly artificial. Smooth, reflective, unlike any known design. "Did they acknowledge your presence?" Byrd asked. Johnson's face darkened. "Yes, sir. They matched our altitude, maintained formation, tracked our movement for 3 minutes before shooting away. It felt like they were studying us." Later that evening, Byrd called me into his quarters. Documents and photographs lay scattered across his desk, including intelligence I hadn't seen, dating back to 1943. Reports from German U-boat crews describing similar sightings in Antarctic waters. "Commander," he said, "tomorrow we begin Project Silent Spear, a classified mission to the coordinates where those objects were seen. You'll accompany the strike team as intelligence liaison." "Strike team, sir? I thought this was reconnaissance." "We're going in armed, Commander," Byrd replied grimly. "Whatever's down there is decades beyond us technologically, and it's watching. We need to understand their intentions before they decide we're a threat." I should have realized then we weren't the hunters. We were being hunted. Entry 5, October 20th, 1946. Grid coordinates 71 degrees. South, 10 west. Queen Maud Land. What happened today will haunt me forever. I'm writing this by flashlight in an emergency shelter. My hands are still shaking. 3 men are dead. 2 helicopters destroyed. And what we discovered will never make it into any official record. Project Silent Spear launched at 0500. Our strike team consisted of 2 helicopters, 12 Marines, and enough armament to level a compound. The objective? A glacial canyon identified by aerial photos, suggesting artificial structures buried under the ice. The flight took 2 hours, navigating worsening weather and growing electromagnetic interference, like whispers in an unknown tongue. Lieutenant Morrison, our pilot, reported multiple malfunctions. As we neared the coordinates, our instruments failed one by one. At 0715, we crested a ridge and saw it. A canyon, vast and unnaturally uniform. Its walls perfectly vertical, as if carved, not formed. On the canyon floor, 500 feet below, metallic structures emerged from the ice. Angular, seamless, bending the light around them. But it wasn't the buildings that froze us. It was what came out of them. 3 disc-shaped crafts, each one 100 feet across, rose in silence from concealed hangars beneath the ice. They didn't fly. They moved, effortlessly, without inertia, reflecting the sky, the ice, and our helicopters with mirror-like clarity. "Command, this is Silent Spear 1, Morrison radioed. "We have visual confirmation of artificial structures and 3 unidentified aircraft, requesting immediate support." Static answered. Then a burst of interference so intense it made the radios crackle like fire. "Proceed with reconnaissance," the distorted voice replied. "Document everything." That's when it began. One of the discs accelerated directly toward us. I braced for weapons fire, but instead, a blinding white beam erupted from its underside, flooding our aircraft in radiant energy. Every electrical system failed. Radios, engines, instruments. The chopper dropped like a stone. "Mayday! Mayday!" Morrison screamed as he tried to level us into auto-rotation. But we weren't flying. We were falling. Through the chaos, I saw the second chopper get hit by the same beam. Its rotors froze. It fell in silence, straight into the canyon. I never heard the second helicopter crash. Not over the roar of our own emergency landing. We hit the ground hard, but mostly level, the skids carving deep furrows into the snow. Morrison was unconscious, blood flowing from a gash on his forehead. Sergeant Williams and 2 Marines were shaken, but still alert. I grabbed the emergency radio and camera, knowing we might have only minutes before whatever was inside those discs decided our fate. That's when I saw one, up close. The disc settled silently on the ice, about 50 yards from our crash site. No landing gear extended, no engines wound down. It simply stopped moving and hovered, 3 feet above the ground. Its surface was flawless, like liquid mercury, and covered in shifting symbols, none of which resembled any language I'd ever seen. They weren't German. In fact, they weren't any human script at all. The markings moved across the hull in slow, fluid motion, mesmerizing and distinctly alien. As I watched, a section of the underside opened. Not like a mechanical door, but like a living membrane parting. No one stepped out. But I felt something, a presence. It was observing us, judging. The silence was total, broken only by the wind and Morrison's ragged breathing. I raised the camera and managed 3 photographs before Sergeant Williams grabbed my arm. "Sir, we need to move. Now." He was right. Whatever intelligence piloted that craft, it had allowed us to survive. That meant either mercy or curiosity. and I didn't want to find out which would run out first. We fashioned a stretcher from what gear we could salvage, lifted Morrison, and started the climb back toward the canyon rim. The discs followed us, 3 of them, hovering silently at a fixed distance, like shepherds herding fragile sheep. They never acted aggressively, but their very presence was a constant reminder that our survival depended solely on their forbearance. It took 6 grueling hours to reach the rim, where emergency crews were waiting. Only when we reached safety did the crafts accelerate skyward, vanishing into the clouds at speeds that made our best fighter jets seem laughable. Admiral Byrd was already at the site. His face was pale and drawn as we loaded Morrison into the medical chopper. He pulled me aside. "What did you see, Commander?" I told him everything, the structures, the crafts, the way they moved, how they responded to us. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Did they communicate?" he finally asked. "Any attempt at contact?" "No, sir," I replied, then hesitated. But I felt something. They weren't hostile. They could have wiped us out without effort, but they didn't. It felt like a warning. Byrd nodded slowly. "A warning?" "Yes, I think you're right." He looked back toward the canyon, now hidden by weather and distance. "The question is, what exactly are they warning us about?" Entry 6, October 25th, 1946. USS Pine Island, Emergency Conference. The past 5 days have been consumed by classified debriefings, urgent transmissions to Washington, and a growing realization. We have encountered something that defies every framework of human understanding. The photographs I took were analyzed by top intelligence personnel. Their conclusions are both astounding and terrifying. The symbols on the craft were not decorative. Linguistic experts believe they may function as a communication system, or perhaps even as a kind of interface. The material the crafts are composed of is unlike any alloy known to current metallurgy. It displays physical properties that defy our understanding of material science. But perhaps most disturbing, intelligence reports from around the Southern Ocean are now surfacing. Naval destroyers have reported high-speed craft shadowing them before diving beneath the ice. A submarine crew described sonar readings from objects moving at underwater speeds no vessel should be capable of. Then came the message. Yesterday, Admiral Byrd received a communication. From Washington, yes, but not through standard military channels. I wasn't in the room for the briefing, but his expression afterward told me everything. Our mission was no longer reconnaissance. We were being recalled. "Commander Hale," Byrd said that night, calling me into his quarters, "you need to hear something. What we've encountered here can never go public. The impact would be catastrophic. Civil panic, destabilized governments, you name it." "With respect, sir," I said, "don't the American people have a right to know?" He laughed, a bitter sound. "3 days ago," he said, "I received a message. Not over radio, it was on my desk, in perfect English, with details about this mission that only a few people could possibly know." He handed me the document. The message was brief and chilling. "Admiral Byrd, your presence in our territory has been noted. We do not seek conflict, but continued intrusion will be regarded as hostile. You have 72 hours to withdraw your forces south of the 60th parallel. This is not a negotiation." The paper felt strange in my hand, not like normal stock. The text shimmered faintly under the lamplight. "Who sent this?" I asked, though I already suspected. "The same beings we encountered," Byrd said. "The same intelligence that could have destroyed us, but didn't. They're offering us a chance. The question is whether we're wise enough to take it." Entry 7, November 2nd, 1946. Final Operations Meeting. Today, Admiral Byrd made a decision that would define the rest of his life. Operation High Jump was being terminated, effective immediately. All personnel were to be evacuated within 48 hours. Any non-essential equipment was to be abandoned. All mission data would be sealed at the highest levels of classification. The official reason to the press would be unexpected weather conditions and equipment failures. The truth would be buried, so deep that even most of the men involved would never know what we had truly encountered. In the final intelligence briefing, Admiral Byrd addressed the core team, 15 men who knew. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice heavy with weariness, "what we've encountered in Antarctica represents a shift in human understanding. We are not alone, and whoever is down there, they are decades, perhaps centuries ahead of us." He paused, looking each of us in the eye. "We were warned, told to leave, told never to return, and it wasn't a bluff. I have no doubt they can, and will, make good on that threat if provoked." Lieutenant Colonel Henderson, who had been skeptical throughout the mission, finally broke the silence. "Admiral, are we really going to let them dictate terms to the United States Navy?" Byrd's expression turned grim. "Colonel, in the past month we've lost 2 helicopters, 3 men, and a submarine that vanished beneath the ice near their territory. Every encounter has proven one thing: they can destroy us at will. This isn't surrender. This is survival." The room fell quiet. The truth was inescapable and more bitter than any defeat. I asked, "What now? Do we pretend none of this ever happened?" Byrd walked to the window, looking out at the ice stretching to the horizon. "Commander," he said softly, "I'm going to tell you something that can never appear in any official record. Before we leave, I'm going to try to speak to them, directly. I need to understand their goals, their technology, and whether we face peaceful coexistence or inevitable conflict." "Is that wise?" I asked. "Probably not," he said, "but it's necessary." He turned back to face us. "They've shown restraint, but that could change if they see us as a threat. I need to know where we stand and what's coming next." Then he added one final instruction. "You'll all sign non-disclosure agreements. Your families will be told you participated in cold weather training. Your records will reflect nothing out of the ordinary." He pulled a stack of documents from his desk. "I know this goes against your instincts and mine, but the alternative is chaos. How do you tell the world that beneath the ice lies a civilization that makes our most advanced tech look primitive?" We signed. What choice did we have? Entry 8, November 5th, 1946. Personal log, final entry. Today, Admiral Byrd made contact. I wasn't supposed to be there, but he insisted I join him as a witness. We flew to coordinates that had been sent through the same mysterious channel as before. The location was an unmarked sheet of ice, 50 miles from base, disturbed only by a perfectly circular patch of snow. We landed at the circle's edge and waited. The air was perfectly still. The silence was total and overwhelming. After 20 minutes, 3 disc-shaped craft appeared on the horizon, gliding toward us with their characteristic impossible grace. They moved into a precise triangular formation, silently hovering 10 feet above the ice. As before, their hulls were smooth as glass, mirror-like, and covered in flowing, luminous symbols that seemed to pulse with an inner light. Then, something happened that none of us were prepared for. One of the craft extended what resembled a ramp, not mechanical, but formed from the same fluid-like material as the ship's surface. A figure emerged from the opening. I've spent hours trying to find the words to describe it. The being was humanoid in general shape, perhaps 7 feet tall, with proportions that were almost, but not quite, familiar. Its skin appeared translucent, glowing faintly with an internal luminescence that hinted at biological processes unlike anything on Earth. Its features were sharp, elegant. The eyes were large, reflective, and filled with a depth of intelligence that felt both ancient and utterly alien. What struck me most was not its appearance, but the absence of hostility. There was no aggression in its demeanor, only curiosity, perhaps mild concern, but not fear and certainly not malice. It approached Admiral Byrd directly, stopping roughly 10 feet away. When it spoke, it did not use sound. Its words formed directly in our minds, clear, unaccented, and deeply unsettling in their intimacy. Admiral Byrd, you have shown wisdom in heeding our warnings. Your species stands at a crossroads. The decisions made in the coming decades will determine whether contact becomes beneficial or necessary for your survival. Byrd, to his credit, remained composed, though I could see the strain behind his calm expression. "What do you want from us?" he asked. "We want nothing from you. We have observed your kind for millennia, watching your development with interest. Your recent mastery of atomic energy has drawn our more direct attention. Such power, in the hands of a species still learning restraint, is a threat, not only to yourselves but to the balance of this world." "Are you threatening us?" "We are informing you. Your activities in this region must cease. The knowledge you have gained will remain contained. In return, we will continue our policy of non-interference, for now." The message was clear. We had been monitored for thousands of years, and our growing technological capability had triggered a response. "What happens if we refuse?" Byrd asked. The being's expression didn't change, but the temperature around us seemed to drop noticeably. "Your species is young, Admiral. It has not yet learned that actions have consequences, boundaries that must not be crossed. We have preserved the stability of this planet long before your civilizations emerged. We will continue to do so, with or without your cooperation." With that, the communication ended. The being turned and ascended the ramp, which then dissolved seamlessly back into the hull. All three crafts lifted skyward in perfect unison and vanished within seconds, accelerating at speeds that defied any known physical law. Byrd was silent on the return flight. Only when we were alone in his quarters did he finally speak. "Commander," he said quietly, "promise me something. If anything happens to me, if I die under mysterious circumstances or disappear, I want you to ensure the truth survives. Not the official version, the real one." "Sir, what are you planning?" "I'm going to give them what they want. Total withdrawal, absolute secrecy, and a formal end to operations in Antarctica. But I'm also going to make sure someone, somewhere, knows what we found. Because this isn't over, Commander. It's just the beginning." 3 days later, we departed Antarctica. The official report cited unexpected weather and mechanical issues as reasons for the early termination of Operation High Jump. During a brief stop in Chile, Admiral Byrd gave an interview to local press in which he warned cryptically about enemies capable of flying from pole to pole in minutes. The remarks were later dismissed as metaphorical references to future aerial warfare, but I knew better. He had tried, subtly, to alert the world. Final entry, Mason Hale. "I'm dying. Cancer, the doctors say, but I've long suspected it might be linked to something I was exposed to during those weeks in Antarctica nearly half a century ago. I've carried this secret for 47 years, watching as the world edges closer to the precipice that being warned us about." Admiral Byrd died in 1957. With him went the last official link to what we encountered. He never spoke publicly about it, and never returned to Antarctica. He knew, as I now know, that some doors should remain shut. Over the decades, I've watched for signs that they're still observing us. unexplained aerial phenomena, technological leaps that don't follow expected development curves, quiet shifts in policy and aerospace strategy. I believe they've been intervening subtly, guiding, perhaps even preventing us from destroying ourselves. But I also believe their patience is not endless. Recent global developments suggest we're nearing another crossroads: environmental collapse, nuclear proliferation, rising instability. We were given time to mature, to grow our wisdom alongside our power. Whether we succeeded remains to be seen. I've hidden this journal for nearly 5 decades, waiting for the right moment. But as my time runs out, I realize that moment may never come. So I leave this record behind, hoping that someday someone will read it. And remember, because they are still there beneath the ice, watching, waiting, and the warning they gave still holds. They've been guardians of this world long before we were born. Next time, we may not be allowed to leave. Postscript. The journal of Lieutenant Commander Mason Hale was discovered in a safety deposit box in Phoenix, Arizona, in 1996, 3 years after his death from cancer. His nephew, David Hale, initially published portions of the journal online. Within 48 hours, all digital copies were mysteriously scrubbed from every major platform. 2 weeks later, David Hale died in a car accident under circumstances some have called suspicious. The version you've just read was reconstructed from archived backups found on defunct servers and offline private storage. Its authenticity has never been formally verified. The United States Navy maintains that Operation High Jump was a standard cold-weather training and research mission, completed without incident. Admiral Richard E. Byrd's post-expedition interview in Chile, where he spoke of enemies capable of traversing the globe in minutes, remains a matter of public record. His quiet removal from polar operations and refusal to discuss the matter has never been officially explained. Antarctica remains under international treaty. Military activity is prohibited. No nation has attempted a mission on the scale of High Jump in the region where Hale reported contact. As always, the truth remains buried in the ice. The Dyatlov Pass Incident. Tonight, I'll be your guide into one of the coldest and most enduring mysteries of the Cold War. Picture this. It's a winter night deep in the Ural Mountains, 1959. A group of young hikers huddles in a canvas tent pitched on the snowy slope of a peak, ominously named Dead Mountain. They're laughing, writing in journals by flashlight, planning the next day's route. They don't know it, but this is their final night alive. This is the true story of the Dyatlov Pass incident, a case that has baffled investigators for more than 60 years. My name is James, and I've spent weeks combing through case files, old diaries, and autopsy reports. The more I learn, the more the Dyatlov case feels like a nightmare poised between fact and folklore. Let's begin, step by step, as if we're opening an old Soviet case file. The story starts in late January 1959. 10 experienced ski hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute set out to reach a remote peak called Otorten in the northern Urals. They were all in their early 20s, except for one older instructor. 7 men, 2 women. The group was led by 23-year-old radio engineering student Igor Dyatlov. On January 23rd, they received their route approval and boarded a train from Sverdlovsk to Ivdel. You can almost picture them, cheerful, confident, full of adventure. One brought a mandolin, and they reportedly sang along during the journey. After 2 days by rail, they reached Ivdel, a remote settlement that also hosted a Soviet labor camp. From there, they traveled by bus, then hitched a ride in the back of a lumber truck to the village of Vijay, the last inhabited outpost before the wilderness. The villagers likely looked at the young adventurers with both admiration and concern. The route they planned was rated Category 3, the most difficult. and they were attempting it in early February, the harshest time of year. On January 27th, the group left Vijay and disappeared into the snow-covered mountains, but they were already one short. Yuri Yudin, one of the hikers, had suffered from chronic joint pain and a heart condition. On January 28th, his symptoms worsened, and he reluctantly turned back, unaware that by doing so he was becoming the expedition's sole survivor. Yuri Yudin would never see his friends alive again. The remaining 9 hikers pressed on into the wilderness, unaware of the fate that awaited them. Through recovered journals and photographs, investigators have reconstructed much of their route. By January 31st, the group had reached the edge of a highland area. They stored surplus supplies and food in a wooded valley, reserves meant for their return trip. Spirits were still high. They laughed, took photographs, and even created a mock newspaper titled The Evening Otorten, in which one humorous entry proclaimed, "From now on, we know that the snowmen exist," likely a tongue-in-cheek reference to local Yeti folklore. Despite the bitter cold and exhaustion, morale remained strong. On February 1st, the group began their ascent through a mountain pass that would later bear Dyatlov's name. Their plan was to cross the pass and camp on the other side, but the weather took a sudden turn. Winds howled, snow blinded their path, and the group lost their direction on the featureless slope. Instead of continuing through the pass to the forested valley beyond, they drifted west and ended up on the slope of a peak called Kholat Syakho, which in the local Mansi language means dead mountain. By the time they realized the error, it was late and visibility was near zero. Rather than descend 1.5 kilometers to the relative shelter of the forest, Igor Dyatlov decided to make camp on the slope itself. Perhaps he didn't want to lose altitude, or perhaps he wanted to prove that his team could handle camping in exposed, harsh conditions. They dug into the snowy incline and pitched their large canvas tent on the open slope. It was a decision that would later be scrutinized heavily. That night, February 1st, 1959, was brutal. Temperatures dropped to around -20 degrees Celsius. Wind roared across the pass. Still, inside the tent, they remained relatively secure. They ate dinner around 6 or 7 p.m., according to later forensic analysis. One of the final photographs captured shows them laughing and working together, setting up camp in the twilight. Despite the deadly weather outside, they seemed in good spirits, making journal entries and preparing for sleep. They could not have known what would come in the night. In the early hours of February 2nd, something happened. Something so terrifying or so urgent that the group slashed their tent open from the inside and fled into the snow. We have no eyewitnesses, only the physical evidence. The tent was found later, cut open from within. The hikers, most of whom had been sleeping, ran into the blizzard in utter darkness, leaving behind nearly all their gear: boots, jackets, sleeping bags, axes, even their hats. It was -30 degrees Celsius outside, or -22 Fahrenheit. And yet, something drove them out of their only shelter, half-dressed and barefoot, into certain death. Why? That question has haunted investigators for more than 60 years. When the hikers failed to return to Vijay by February 12th as planned, no immediate concern was raised. Minor delays were common, but as more days passed with no word, worry turned to fear. By February 20th, relatives demanded a search and rescue operation. Volunteers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute were dispatched, soon joined by Soviet military units, helicopters, and aircraft. Search teams battled deep snow, low temperatures, and treacherous terrain. Among them was a student named Mikhail Sharavin. On February 26th, Sharavin's group spotted something protruding from the snow on the slope of Kholat Syakho. As they drew closer, they realized it was a tent, collapsed and partially buried. Sharavin hacked through the snow and canvas with an ice axe. What he saw inside chilled him more than the wind. The tent had been slashed open from the inside. Despite being snow-filled and damaged, the hikers' belongings were almost untouched. Coats and blankets were laid out. Boots, axes, and flashlights were neatly arranged along the sides. A map and official documents lay untouched. There was even a small pile of money, a flask of alcohol, and a plate with slices of salo, pork fat, as if someone had been preparing a snack. It was like a moment frozen in time. Not chaos, but abandonment. Sherivan later described the feeling. It was as though the group had been calmly preparing for bed, and then had to flee in an instant. Why would experienced hikers cut open their own tent and escape into a blizzard? Barefoot? Outside, the searchers found 9 sets of footprints. They were strange. Some showed people wearing socks, 1 shoe, or nothing at all. The prints led away from the tent in a relatively orderly manner, suggesting the group walked, hurriedly, but not frantically, downhill in a single file. The searchers followed the prints for nearly 500 meters before they were lost under fresh snowfall. The tracks pointed toward the forest. Perhaps the group hoped to find shelter there. As night fell on February 26th, the team paused their search, haunted by what they'd found. The next day they resumed. At the forest's edge, beneath a tall Siberian cedar, they discovered the remains of a small fire. Nearby lay the first 2 bodies, Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy, Yuri Krivonishenko. Both were barefoot, dressed only in their underwear. Branches on the cedar above them were broken up to 5 meters high, as if someone had climbed the tree. Bits of skin and torn fabric were found on the bark. It appeared one of them had climbed the cedar, perhaps to locate the tent in the darkness, or to escape. Something. Krivonishenko's body showed burns. Most disturbingly, a piece of flesh was missing from his hand. It was later determined that he had bitten off part of his own knuckle, perhaps to stay awake, perhaps to stifle a scream. Their hands and feet were a deep reddish brown. Classic signs of frostbite. The fire they'd built was small and had burned out quickly. The wood was stripped from lower branches of the cedar. The image is horrifying. 2 young men, slowly freezing to death, crouched around a dying fire under an endless black sky. Roughly 300 meters from the cedar, back toward the tent, they found Igor Dyatlov's body. He lay on his back, head turned toward the tent. His body was better dressed than the others. Flannel shirt, sweater, trousers, but he still had no boots. Only socks. 1 arm was frozen upward, reaching toward the sky, holding a small birch branch. His other hand was clenched to his chest. Some believed he was trying to protect something close to his heart. A note, a photo, though nothing was found. His face was calm. Eyes open. Not far away, they found Zinaida, Zina Kolmogorova, age 22. She was dressed in 2 sweaters and 2 pairs of trousers. Still no boots, only socks. Her body lay face down, pointed toward the tent. Her arms were extended as if she had been crawling uphill. A large, dark bruise ran along her right side. A red, narrow mark consistent with being struck by a blunt object, possibly a rifle butt. There were no other major external injuries. On March 5th, rescuers found the 5th body, Rustem Slobodin, age 23. He was better dressed than the others, wearing multiple layers and 4 pairs of socks. 1 boot was on his right foot. His left foot was covered by only a sock. He was found face down, about 480 meters from the cedar. In his right hand was a closed pocket knife. An autopsy revealed a 7-inch linear fracture in his skull, consistent with a heavy blunt impact. But there was no indication of external trauma that would normally accompany such a wound. It was clear. Whatever had driven them from the tent had pursued them, methodically. And the worst was still to come. However, the fracture in Rustem Slobodin's skull was not deemed fatal. The medical examiner concluded that he could have sustained the injury during a fall and remained conscious for up to an hour afterward. Like Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, Doroshenko, and Krivonishenko, Slobodin ultimately died from hypothermia. In fact, the first 5 bodies recovered showed no life-threatening external injuries. All had perished due to the brutal cold. Slobodin's watch was found shattered and frozen at 8:45. Whether that was 8:45 a.m., p.m., or even on a different day remains unclear. It was as though time itself had frozen with them. Now, imagine being Yuri Yudin, the one who had turned back, called upon to identify the bodies of your friends, one by one. The first 5 corpses were airlifted to the morgue in Ivdel for autopsy and identification. With a heavy heart, Yudin confirmed each of them. Yet 4 members of the Dyatlov group were still missing. Weeks passed with no trace. As spring arrived and snow began to melt, nature revealed what had remained hidden, deepening the mystery in the most disturbing way. On May 4th, nearly 3 months after the incident, a local Mansi tribesman named Kurin, helping with the search, noticed his dog pick up a scent near a rocky ravine deeper in the forest, about 75 meters beyond the cedar tree and 1,500 meters from the tent. There, buried under nearly 4 meters of snow in a narrow ravine, searchers discovered scraps of torn clothing tangled in branches. Digging deeper, they uncovered the final 4 bodies: Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon, Alexander, Zolotaryov, Nikolai Thibault Brignol, and Alexander Kolevatov. All 4 were found lying close together, as though they had died together. Interestingly, 3 of the 4 were dressed more warmly than the earlier victims. It appeared they had taken clothing from the others who died first. Dubinina, for example, wore Krivonishenko's burnt, torn trousers and had wrapped one foot in a piece of his wool sweater. Thibault Brignol was wearing Dubinina's faux fur coat and hat. Kolevatov had donned an extra sweater and pants, likely taken from one of the others. This redistribution of clothing strongly suggests that the last survivors stripped their fallen companions for warmth. A tragic but practical act of survival. But the condition of their bodies only intensified the mystery. Unlike the first 5, 3 of these 4 victims had suffered horrifying, fatal injuries. Nikolai Thibault Brignol had sustained a massive skull fracture, crushing part of his head. The fracture was around 8 inches long. Dubinina and Zolotaryov both had their chests crushed, multiple ribs broken on each side. Lyudmila had 10 fractured ribs. Zolotaryov had 5. A forensic expert later stated that the force required to inflict such damage was comparable to a high-speed car accident. Yet neither had external wounds. No bruises, no cuts, just internal devastation. It was as if an immense pressure had been applied to their bodies without breaking the skin. Alexander Kolevatov, the 4th person found, had less catastrophic injuries. He had a broken nose, an open wound behind his ear, and a distorted neck. Though his injuries were significant, his death was likely caused by hypothermia, possibly after suffering some trauma. Then came the disturbing details that truly propelled the Dyatlov mystery into legend. All 4 bodies in the ravine displayed grotesque facial damage not seen on the earlier victims. Dubinina was missing her tongue, eyes, part of her lips, and a fragment of skull bone. Zolotaryov's eyeballs were gone. Kolevatov's eyebrows were missing. These gruesome details sparked theories of violent assault, or something worse. But forensic experts had a more plausible explanation. The ravine was part of a streambed, and in the 3 months before discovery, water and scavengers likely caused the decomposition and removal of soft facial tissue. In Dubinina's case, The autopsy noted approximately 100 grams of coagulated blood in her stomach, suggesting her heart was still beating when her tongue was removed, meaning the injury occurred shortly after death, possibly by natural decomposition or animals. While horrifying, these injuries were determined to be post-mortem, not the result of violence while alive. Still, the public was captivated. The media sensationalized the details, fueling wild speculation, from murder to alien interference. It didn't help that Zolotaryov was found with a camera around his neck, different from the others discovered in the tent. In his hand, he held a pen and a notebook, as if trying to document something. But the pages were blank. In 1959, investigators were left with more questions than answers. A criminal inquest was opened as standard procedure since several deaths involved traumatic injuries. Initial suspicion fell on the local Mansi tribespeople. Perhaps the hikers had trespassed on sacred land, but that theory was quickly abandoned. No signs of a struggle were found, no extra footprints, and the Mansi had no history of hostility. On the contrary, they assisted in the search. An avalanche was also considered. But the position of the tent and the neat pattern of footprints contradicted typical avalanche behavior. Nor was there evidence of a wild animal attack. No large animal tracks, and no wounds consistent with claws or teeth. Soviet authorities ultimately concluded that no human party had been involved. One investigator famously remarked that the force which killed Dubinina and Zolotaryov was greater than any human could exert. Then, a Cold War twist emerged. Forensic testing of the hikers' clothing revealed abnormal radiation levels. Dubinina's brown sweater and Krivonishenko's wool pants tested positive for radioactive contamination. This discovery baffled investigators and ignited rumors of secret weapons, nuclear exposure, or military experiments gone wrong. But the truth was likely simpler. Krivonishenko had worked at the Mayak nuclear facility and had helped clean up after the 1957 Kishtim disaster, one of the worst nuclear accidents in history. It's likely his clothing was contaminated during that time and still retained traces of radiation. Kolovatov, too, had worked at a secret nuclear research institute in Moscow, possibly explaining contamination on his garments. The radioactive clothing may have had nothing to do with the group's deaths. Yet, the discovery of tanned skin and gray hair on some bodies, reported by grieving families, added fuel to speculation. Authorities claimed the skin discoloration was a result of natural mummification caused by exposure to sun and snow. Hair can also change color due to decomposition and embalming fluids. But to mourning parents in 1959, the combination of radioactive clothes, orange skin, and silent officials seemed like something out of a science fiction horror film. By May, the investigation was quietly wrapped up. Lead investigator Lev Ivanov was under pressure to close the case. In his final report, he wrote that the hikers died due to an unknown compelling force. It was a vague, almost mystical phrase, essentially admitting that no one knew what had happened. No criminal charges were filed. The files were classified and sealed in a Soviet archive. The Dyatlov Pass area was declared off-limits for 3 years, allegedly for safety, though many suspect it was to keep others away. The official conclusion: the hikers died because of an undefined but natural force. But that answer left more questions than it solved. 9 promising young lives were lost, and their families were told they would never know why. In 1959, in the Soviet Union, that was the end of the matter. Some families suspected a cover-up. Zina Kolmogorova's mother and Igor Dyatlov's parents were quietly warned not to pursue further questions. Officials reportedly told them, "You will never know the truth, so stop asking." And in an era when the party or the KGB said, "Stay silent," you did, out of fear. So the parents buried their children without answers. and the Dyatlov mystery became a chilling Cold War legend. Whispered about in Ural classrooms and mountaineering clubs, the Dyatlov Pass incident became a legend. As for Yuri Yudin, the sole survivor who hadn't even been present that night, he lived the rest of his life burdened with survivor's guilt and a relentless need to uncover the truth. Yudin consistently argued that his friends had not died due to a simple natural disaster. Deep in his gut, he believed something else, something man-made, had been responsible. In interviews before his death in 2013, Yudin voiced his belief that Soviet authorities had known more about the incident than they ever revealed. In fact, shortly before he passed away, Yudin publicly claimed he believed his teammates had been forced from the tent at gunpoint and murdered. He even speculated that Dubinina's tongue had been cut out because she was the most outspoken member of the group. These were grave accusations, and none were ever substantiated. Yudin admitted he had no concrete evidence, only suspicions born from a lifetime of reflection. Whether he was right or wrong, Yudin's convictions illustrate how deeply the Dyatlov mystery could burrow into the human soul. And so, decades later, we still find ourselves with more questions than answers. I'm a modern investigator, sifting through weathered files and fresh theories. And as I examine each piece of evidence, I can still feel the wind from Dead Mountain echoing through time. The Dyatlov Pass case endures precisely because it sits at the intersection of the explainable and the unknowable. Over the years, countless theories have been proposed, some rooted in science, others diving into the paranormal or conspiratorial. Let's walk through these theories one by one, each a path branching from the same unsolved mystery. Any satisfying explanation must account for all the strange details, the slashed tent, the hiker's undressed state, their bizarre injuries, the radiation, the reported lights in the sky, and of course, the secrecy that followed. One of the most straightforward theories, and the one eventually adopted by Russian authorities, is the avalanche theory. According to this scenario, the group was sleeping when a slab of snow above them suddenly gave way. The tent, partially buried, began to collapse. Hearing the telltale cracking of shifting snow, the hikers panicked. Believing they were seconds from being buried alive, they made a split-second decision. They grabbed a knife and slashed their way out, fleeing into the night wearing only what they had on at that moment. This theory gained traction in recent years. In 2020, the Russian government reopened the case and concluded that a slab avalanche had caused the deaths. Around the same time, a scientific team published a study using computer models that supported the plausibility of such an event. Viewed through this lens, the group's actions no longer seem irrational. If you believe an avalanche is imminent, slashing your way out and getting to safer ground is a logical response. Their decision to head for the tree line, nearly a mile away, makes sense as an attempt to get out of the danger zone. The theory proposes that wind or stove heat destabilized the snow above, triggering the slab slide. The hikers, trained and experienced, initiated an emergency evacuation. In the chaos, they didn't take time to gather coats, boots, or gear. Survival meant moving immediately. After reaching the forest, they split up. Some attempted to build a fire under the cedar tree. Others dug a snow shelter in a nearby ravine. Evidence suggests the final four tried to survive longer, using salvaged clothing and sheltering in deeper snow. The avalanche theory ties together many of the facts: panic, cold, missing gear, even the crushing injuries, possibly caused by falling into the ravine or being struck by compacted snow. Yet, some argue that this explanation still falls short of accounting for every strange detail, and so the mystery continues to invite new interpretations. New story: The Disappearance of Flight MH370. If this is your first time with sleep theories, welcome to our corner of the internet, where we explore the stories that keep us awake at night. The mysteries that official reports never quite resolve. The questions that linger long after the headlines fade. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We have investigations that will challenge everything you thought you knew about the world around you. My name is Daniel Rhodes. For 32 years, I analyzed threats that didn't officially exist. NSA, CIA, names you know, and a few acronyms that still don't have Wikipedia pages. When I retired in 2012, I thought I'd finally sleep soundly, that the secrets and shadows of geopolitics would remain in my rearview mirror. Then, Flight MH370 vanished, and sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. March 8, 2014, 12:41 a.m., local time. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 pushed back from Gate C1 at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. At the controls, Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, 53 years old, with over 18,000 hours of flight time. First Officer Fairik Abdul Hamid, 27, still transitioning to the Boeing 777. Their job was simple: carry 237 passengers and crew on a routine 6-hour flight to Beijing Capital International Airport. Everything proceeded normally for exactly 38 minutes. At 1:19 a.m., the first officer's voice crackled over radio. "Good night, Malaysian 370. It was the last transmission officially acknowledged from the aircraft. Within 2 minutes, the plane's transponder went dark. Malaysia's radar, then secondary surveillance systems across Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia, lost the signal. MH370 had vanished from the sky. Authorities hoped for a technical glitch, a radar blind spot, or even hijacking. Anything but the terrifying reality that was unfolding above the South China Sea. Because the plane didn't crash. It didn't explode. It simply disappeared from every radar, every monitoring system, every sensor designed to track aircraft in one of the world's busiest air corridors. But here's what the public wasn't told. MH370 didn't just vanish from Malaysian radar. It disappeared from secondary surveillance across 3 nations, simultaneously. The odds of that kind of synchronized system failure are near zero. I didn't learn this from CNN or the BBC. I learned it from a phone call I received 6 months after the plane vanished. The caller identified himself only as Mitchell, a voice I hadn't heard since a classified briefing at Langley in 2009. "Danny," he said, using a nickname only 5 people on Earth were cleared to use. "You still have that security clearance?" "Retired, not revoked," I answered. "Why?" "Look at Diego Garcia," he said, "and stop trusting the satellite data." Then he hung up. That was it. That was Mitchell. Cryptic as ever. Diego Garcia, the U.S. military base on British territory in the Indian Ocean, one of the most secretive facilities in the world. What did a Malaysian airliner have to do with a top-secret installation thousands of miles away? I tried to let it go. I had a house in Vermont, a garden, a pension. But Mitchell's words stuck with me like a splinter in my brain. So I started digging. The first thing I found, Diego Garcia was roughly 2,400 miles southwest of MH370's last known location, well within the range of a fully fueled Boeing 777. The second, there was a suspicious gap in radar coverage, a stretch of airspace between Indonesia and the Indian Ocean that I came to call the Southern Silence Corridor, a dead zone wide enough to hide a commercial jet. The third thing changed everything. Inmarsat, a British satellite communications company, had been quietly receiving handshake signals from MH370 for over 6 hours after it disappeared from radar. That meant the plane was still flying, long after the world had assumed it had crashed. The data revealed that MH370 had veered off course and flown on a southern arc, deep into the Indian Ocean, far from any logical destination. By the time search efforts shifted to this region, it was too late. Wind, current, and time had erased most physical evidence. But I had resources the public didn't. And the deeper I looked, the stranger the story became. I obtained copies of the raw Inmarsat data, including technical annotations that had been redacted from public releases. What I found, scribbled in the margins, made my hands tremble. The satellite pings revealed that MH370 hadn't simply flown south and crashed. The aircraft had performed a series of altitude changes and course adjustments that strongly indicated active piloting during its final hours. More disturbingly, some of the ping intervals showed the aircraft flying in holding patterns, circling above the ocean, as though waiting for clearance to land somewhere. I cross-referenced the satellite telemetry with maritime traffic records from Indian Ocean shipping lanes on the night of March 8, 2014. What I found was even stranger. There had been a conspicuous absence of commercial ships along the plane's projected flight path. Vessels that should have been in the area, based on their filed routes, had either altered course or delayed departure. It was as though someone had quietly cleared a corridor through one of the world's busiest shipping zones. Then I found the eyewitness accounts. In September 2014, residents of Kuta Huvadhu Island in the Maldives reported seeing a low-flying aircraft at approximately 6:15 a.m. local time on March 8th, roughly 6 hours after MH370's final radar contact. The plane, they described, was white, with red markings consistent with Malaysia Airlines livery. It flew unusually low, heading southwest over the open ocean. Initially, the Maldivian government investigated these claims, but within days they classified the findings and refused to comment further. Pressed by international media, officials dismissed the sightings as confusion with a domestic flight. But I knew something the public didn't. There were no scheduled domestic flights over Kuta Huvadhu at that hour on March 8, 2014. The island's airport had been closed for runway repairs since March 5th. The only other flight in the region, a Maldivian air taxi, wasn't scheduled to depart Malé until 7:30 a.m., flying in the opposite direction. To the southwest of the Maldives lay 800 miles of open ocean, and then Diego Garcia. I began constructing a timeline, and what emerged made my decades in intelligence analysis feel like kindergarten. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 hadn't crashed. It had been diverted along a carefully engineered path that avoided radar, maritime traffic, and civilian detection, until the last possible moment when islanders happened to glance up and see something they were never meant to witness. But why? What could possibly justify the calculated disappearance of a commercial jet and the deaths of 239 innocent people? The answer wasn't in the aircraft. It was in the passenger manifest. Every intelligence analyst learns to scan for patterns buried beneath the surface of randomness. MH370's manifest contained several anomalies that should have triggered alarms long before takeoff. 20 passengers were employed by Freescale Semiconductor, a Texas-based firm specializing in microprocessors and embedded systems. They were en route to a Beijing tech conference, carrying laptops and documents related to advanced radar and stealth applications. Among them was Dr. Chen Wei, lead engineer on a Freescale research initiative known internally as Project Mirror, an effort focused on real-time manipulation of radar signatures. 4 passengers were traveling under stolen Austrian and Italian passports. Though the passport thefts were quickly traced, the true identities of those who used them to board the plane were never confirmed. Interpol reported that the tickets had been purchased with cash through a Bangkok travel agency that kept no detailed records beyond basic itinerary data. And then there was Yen Lo. Listed as a software consultant traveling from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing, Yen Lo was, in reality, a former cyber analyst for the Chinese military. According to files I accessed through sources I cannot and will not disclose, he had been developing quantum encryption algorithms for the PLA's third department, China's Signals Intelligence Division. 6 months before MH370's disappearance, Yen Lo had quietly approached the CIA through an intermediary, offering to defect. He claimed to possess breakthrough research in quantum-resistant encryption, advances that could render Western surveillance capabilities obsolete within a decade. Negotiations had been underway since December 2013, but stalled over concerns for his family's safety in mainland China and his steep financial demands. What Lo didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that his communications with the CIA had been intercepted by the NSA's Special Collection Service, operating out of the U.S. Embassy in Kuala Lumpur. He'd been under NSA surveillance since October 2013. I spent weeks reconstructing the intelligence picture as it would have appeared to U.S. decision-makers in the days leading up to the flight. What emerged was a convergence of national security interests far too aligned to be dismissed as coincidence. Freescale Semiconductor's largest shareholder was a private equity firm known as Jacob Partners, an entity tied to DARPA-funded programs involving experimental radar systems. The 20 Freescale employees weren't just attending a tech summit. They were transporting prototype hardware and proprietary code. Their project could, in theory, make aircraft invisible to radar. Yen Lo's encryption work, if viable, would dismantle decades of American investment in signals intelligence. It could enable Chinese communications to operate beyond the reach of Western detection and decryption. Together, these two payloads, one corporate, one covert, represented a potential leap forward for Chinese intelligence capabilities. The convergence was too precise. One flight, from a country with lax aviation oversight, heading toward Beijing, a city where both the Freescale material and Yen Lo's research would vanish into military black sites. But there was one final anomaly. 3 weeks before MH370 disappeared, a Boeing 797 identical to the missing aircraft was observed at Diego Garcia during a satellite imaging pass by a commercial provider. The plane was parked inside a maintenance hangar typically reserved for U.S. military aircraft. I acquired higher-resolution images through unofficial channels. What I saw made my blood run cold. The aircraft in the photo had a unique antenna configuration that exactly matched the specifications of MH370. Someone had been preparing this operation for weeks, maybe months, positioning resources, creating flight corridors, and establishing fallback facilities. All they needed was the right opportunity. A single flight carrying assets whose removal would serve multiple strategic aims. Flight MH370 was not a victim of pilot error, mechanical failure, or terrorism. It was hijacked by the most advanced intelligence infrastructure on Earth, executed with such precision that the truth would remain hidden in plain sight. And that wasn't the end. In November 2015, 18 months after MH370 vanished, I received an encrypted email from a sender I didn't recognize. The message contained only a phone number and a phrase, Hangar 7, Test Flight 847. I stared at it for 10 minutes before understanding. Hangar 7 was a Boeing facility in Everett, Washington, used for integrating experimental avionics. Test Flight 847 was a black-budget program I'd heard whispers about in classified briefings back in 2010, an effort to develop optical camouflage for high-altitude aircraft. I dialed the number. Mr. Rhodes? The voice was shaky, middle-aged, Southern accent. My name is Marcus Webb. I used to work for Boeing. I think we need to talk. We met 3 days later in a diner outside Everett. Webb was pale and thin, his exhaustion unmistakable, the kind of fatigue that comes from harboring secrets too heavy for rest. He had worked as an avionics technician at Boeing for 15 years, specializing in stealth and comm systems. In 2013, he'd been assigned to a black project known only as Ghost Protocol. They told us it was about next-gen stealth transports, he said, nervously stirring sugar into his coffee. Optical masking, high-altitude camouflage. What he told me next would unravel everything I thought I knew about MH370 and about who's really watching from above. The concept was to make aircraft virtually invisible to both radar and the human eye by manipulating electromagnetic signatures in real time. The technology functioned by integrating a network of sensors and transmitters directly into the skin of the aircraft. These components detected incoming radar signals, analyzed their properties, and then emitted countersignals designed to nullify the radar return. Simultaneously, optical sensors would scan the visual environment above and below the aircraft, projecting those images onto specialized panels covering the fuselage. We tested it twice, Webb continued. The first test was a partial success. We achieved approximately 60% radar signature reduction and around 40% optical camouflage. But the second test, he paused, eyes locked on his coffee cup. The second test, something went wrong. The aircraft disappeared entirely. Their own radar couldn't detect it. Visual observers lost track. Even GPS failed. For nearly 8 minutes, a Boeing 777 flew through controlled airspace, and no one had any idea where it was. Eventually, the test aircraft reappeared on radar, suffering what the official report described as cascading avionics failures. The Ghost Protocol program was suspended immediately, classified above top secret, and all hardware was secured in storage facilities Webb no longer had access to. But he had retained technical documentation. I knew something was off, he said, when they made us sign fresh NDAs 6 months after the program had supposedly ended. Then, when MH370 vanished, I started connecting the dots. The flight path, the radar gaps, the way it just vanished. It was exactly like our second test. Webb believed Ghost Protocol technology had been secretly installed on MH370, either during routine servicing or through covert means. Its disappearance from radar wasn't due to a turned-off transponder. It was because the plane had been rendered electronically invisible. But why? I asked. If the goal was to abduct the passengers or their technology, why not just disappear them after landing in Beijing? Why hijack an entire commercial aircraft? Webb's answer made clear why he hadn't slept in months. Because this wasn't just about the passengers, he said. It was a field test. They wanted to see if they could make a commercial airliner vanish under controlled conditions, with the whole world watching. If Ghost Protocol worked on MH370, it could work on anything. Air Force One, enemy bombers, civilian flights carrying targets they wanted gone without leaving a trace. According to Webb, the aircraft had been remotely piloted using Boeing's uninterruptible autopilot system, a fail-safe designed to prevent hijackings by allowing control from the ground. The system had been modified to accept satellite commands, enabling remote operation from thousands of miles away. They flew it to Diego Garcia, Webb said with conviction. Landed it, processed the passengers, then either destroyed the aircraft or flew it elsewhere for indefinite storage. The debris that washed ashore in later years? Planted, Webb insisted. Dropped from cargo planes or submarines to maintain the illusion of a crash in the Indian Ocean. I asked Webb why he was telling me this. Why risk his life, his family's safety, and his freedom to expose what would amount to an act of war against civilian aviation? Because MH370 won't be the last, he said. I've seen the production schedules for Ghost Protocol components. They're manufacturing it for operational deployment. Commercial flights, military transports, maybe even spacecraft. They're preparing to make things disappear whenever it serves their goals. Webb handed me a flash drive. It contained detailed technical specifications for Ghost Protocol, maintenance logs from the Boeing facility where it was developed, and satellite images of an aircraft matching MH370's profile at Diego Garcia, both before and after its disappearance. Then he made me promise that if anything happened to him, I'd make sure the information reached people who could act. 2 weeks later, Marcus Webb died in what Everett police reported as a single-vehicle crash. His car left the road during clear weather and collided with a tree at an unusual angle. On a stretch of highway he had driven safely for over 15 years, less than 2 miles from his home. I kept my promise. The first piece of alleged MH370 debris was discovered on July 29, 2015, on Reunion Island, a French territory in the western Indian Ocean, roughly 2,300 miles from the presumed crash site. It was a flaperon, a movable section of the aircraft's wing. Malaysian, French, and Boeing investigators confirmed it originated from MH370. But the discovery raised more questions than it answered. Oceanographers stated that debris from a southern Indian Ocean crash would take between 12 and 18 months to reach Réunion. MH370 disappeared 16 months earlier, right within that predicted time frame. But the condition of the flaperon didn't fit. Marine biologists noted inconsistencies in the barnacle growth on the part. The barnacles appeared too mature for the time supposedly spent in open water, and the distribution suggested the fragment had been exposed to varying water temperatures and salinity levels. Some sections showed signs of scraping, followed by regrowth under different conditions. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a marine biologist at the University of Cape Town, conducted an independent analysis of available photos. Her conclusions were unsettling. She suggested the fragment had been stored in controlled saltwater conditions, then introduced into open ocean currents only recently. The growth patterns indicate exposure to multiple marine environments, she wrote in a peer-reviewed article. It was published, then retracted 6 weeks later without explanation. That flaperon was only the beginning. Between 2015 and 2018, over 30 more debris pieces were reportedly recovered from Mozambique, Madagascar, South Africa, and Tanzania. These included wing parts, interior panels, engine cowling, and personal belongings from passengers. Each find seemed to reinforce the official crash narrative. But when I acquired the unreleased forensic reports on those fragments, a different picture emerged. Several pieces bore clean tool marks, evidence they'd been intentionally separated from larger sections, rather than torn away by high-speed impact. The cuts were straight and precise, not jagged or splintered as you'd expect from a crash. Other fragments showed signs of freshwater exposure. The mineral deposits and corrosion patterns couldn't have formed in saltwater. They were indicative of long-term immersion in enclosed freshwater environments. Isotope analysis of barnacles on several pieces revealed exposure to water with unique chemical signatures found around coral atolls, similar to those near Diego Garcia. Not open ocean conditions. When I mapped the timing and locations of debris discoveries, a suspicious pattern emerged. The finds tracked known shipping routes and U.S. and British naval exercise zones in the Indian Ocean. In October 2017, I acquired satellite imagery showing U.S. Navy submarines surfacing in international waters off the coast of Mozambique, just 48 hours before local fishermen found a wing fragment nearby. This pattern repeated in other places: Madagascar, Tanzania. First, military activity, then debris. The most damning detail came in early 2018. A former U.S. Navy diver reached out to me through encrypted channels. He claimed he had participated in deep-water salvage training operations in the Indian Ocean during 2016 and 2017. Those training missions, he said, involved deploying aircraft debris from submarines, placing them at pre-selected locations under the cover of routine naval exercises. They then monitored how ocean currents and weather patterns would affect the movement of the fragments toward nearby coastlines. "We were told it was environmental research," the diver explained during a conversation I cannot record or verify. Something about tracking ocean currents for climate change studies. But the debris we were dropping wasn't generic testing material. It was airplane parts. Some of them had identification numbers that had been partially removed or altered. The diver provided GPS coordinates for several drop sites that matched precisely with the locations where MH370 debris was later found. He also described seeing aircraft fragments stored in sealed containers aboard submarines, fragments that showed clear signs of controlled saltwater exposure, meant to simulate the effects of long-term ocean drift. "They had marine biologists on the operation," he said. "Scientists were cultivating specific types of barnacles and algae, then attaching them to the debris before we dropped it. Everything was designed to look like it had been drifting in the ocean for exactly the right amount of time." The debris discoveries, which seemed to confirm MH370's tragic fate, were in fact part of an elaborate deception. Someone had been systematically planting evidence along thousands of miles of coastline, using military resources and scientific expertise to construct a false narrative that would satisfy investigators and grieving families alike. But the most staggering revelation was still to come. In March of 2019, exactly 5 years after MH370's disappearance, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a single printed photograph with no metadata or markings. The image depicted the interior of what looked like a military maintenance hangar. Concrete floors, overhead cranes, industrial lighting. At the center of the frame, partially obscured by camouflage netting, stood the unmistakable silhouette of a Boeing 777. The tail number wasn't visible, but several distinct features aligned precisely with MH370's known configuration. The antenna array, the winglet structure, even scuff marks on the fuselage that matched reference photographs I'd seen of the aircraft before it vanished. But what made my hands tremble as I studied the image wasn't the aircraft. It was the surroundings. The hangar's structural details, the type of concrete used, the visible industrial equipment, were a match with technical blueprints I had previously obtained for facilities at Diego Garcia. This photograph had been taken inside one of the most secure military installations on the planet and showed an aircraft the world believed had been lost in the depths of the Indian Ocean. I spent weeks verifying the photo with experts in digital forensics, aviation ID, and military architecture. Every analysis confirmed what I already suspected. The aircraft in that hangar was MH370, intact, preserved. 5 years after its supposed destruction, the implications were overwhelming. If the plane had been preserved rather than destroyed, then the passengers may still have been alive, detained in facilities that operated beyond the reach of international law. The debris discovered along coastlines wasn't confirmation of a crash. It was part of a deception, calculated to distract investigators from pursuing the truth. It also meant the operation wasn't over. Ghost Protocol was not a failed prototype. It was an active program, a field-tested operational capability being deployed for unknown but strategic purposes. I began backing up all my files and documentation, preparing to release everything through multiple secure channels. I contacted journalists, former colleagues, and independent filmmakers. Anyone with a platform large enough to break through the wall of silence. Then, one Tuesday morning in April of 2019, 2 men in dark suits knocked on my door. They identified themselves as FAA investigators, but their credentials were not verifiable through any official government database. They seized my computers, backup drives, files, and physical evidence. Everything I had gathered during 5 years of investigation. They informed me that my research had been deemed a potential threat to ongoing aviation security operations and was now classified under provisions of the Patriot Act. I was ordered to immediately cease any and all inquiry into MH370. I was forbidden from contacting the media. I was warned that any attempts to disclose classified information could result in prosecution under the Espionage Act, including life imprisonment. They were calm, polite, but very clear. 3 days later, I received a small, unmarked package in my mailbox. Inside was a single flash drive labeled in block letters. 370 wasn't the first. The contents were unlike anything I'd seen. Satellite imagery spanning the last 10 years. Each image captured aircraft that had disappeared from civilian airspace without explanation. Some were over the Pacific, others the Atlantic. Several were at sites I could not identify, but each image was time-stamped and geotagged, placing the planes at remote military installations, places no civilian airliner should be. The most disturbing files were labeled with future dates. They included satellite projections and what appeared to be renderings of aircraft not yet missing, positioned at military hangars that were still under construction. The disappearance of MH370 wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a larger systemic program to covertly remove aircraft from civilian visibility. Planes carrying sensitive cargo, individuals deemed inconvenient, or those simply flying routes that overlapped with black operations, all of them potential candidates for Ghost Protocol deployment. As I write this, I don't know how much time I have left before the contents of that flash drive are discovered, or before my own disappearance is quietly arranged in the name of national security. But I know one thing. The families of the 239 passengers aboard MH370 deserve to know the truth, even if that truth is more horrifying than the uncertainty they've endured for years. MH370 didn't crash in the Indian Ocean. It was stolen. Stolen by the most advanced intelligence apparatus ever conceived, using technology that renders aircraft completely invisible. Those aboard became collateral damage in a test of capabilities that will undoubtedly be used again. This silence corridor that swallowed MH370 is still active, waiting for the next flight whose passengers or cargo pose too great a risk to be allowed to reach their destination. In a world where aircraft can disappear without a trace, where debris can be manufactured and planted, where military-grade technology overrides every principle of civilian oversight, every flight is vulnerable, every passenger expendable. So, when the next plane vanishes, remember MH370. Remember that not every disappearance is an accident. Some are orchestrated acts carried out by entities that operate beyond law, beyond accountability, beyond conscience. And remember this. In the silence corridor, the truth is whatever those in control want it to be. The sky was never safe. Now, at least, you know why.